So I'm Dr. Dugger, and it is an honor to be in front of you today. And we heard some amazing talks, and I feel very nervous trying to be like the closing act of all these like rock stars that are in this room. The title of my talk, Many Faces of Dementia and Why They Matter. And I turn this on. I know how to do science, but how do I work a laser pointer? Or like this? Yes, no? Oh, just use the computer. So what will I cover today? It's late in the day. Everyone probably had some delicious snacks. So I will be discussing the many faces of dementia. First, I'm going to talk about the types of symptoms. So symptoms are kind of that outward sign of how people are behaving. I'm going to talk about the underlying pathology. So what's in the brains of these people? Also about disease stage. People just don't wake up and have these diseases. It's a process. I'll also be talking about concomitant pathologies, which means a person can have more than one type of dementia in their brain. I also talk about some demographic variables. So dementia can change based on your race, your ethnicity, your diet, where you live, what you've been exposed to. I'll also talk about machine learning. This can be a little bit scary. Don't think of Hal from, what was that movie that Hal was the robot in? Yes. To understand the many faces of dementia. So these are my faces of dementia. These are my grandmothers. My grandma Morensky was the oldest of 10 children. She grew up in West Virginia and was the daughter of a coal miner. You have my grandma Morensky, who she was the daughter of Polish immigrants, and the names of them were Adam and Eve. So I actually started off in this country with Adam and Eve. These are two extraordinary women who had two extraordinary lives. And this photo of my grandma Morensky is actually on her 50th wedding anniversary. So both of these amazing women got dementia. One, however, had symptoms that she didn't remember who I was. She would come to me and say, "Oh, can you please say hi to my granddaughter? She goes to school with you." But yet she could still remember when she went to church, and this was a church that she had never been in her whole entire life. And she would sit in that same exact spot at church every Sunday. My other grandma, however, had more of a dementia that had hallucinations. So she would imagine, well, not imagine, they were hallucinations. So she would envision these people on the TV would come out and have breakfast with her every morning. And she would have wonderful conversations with these people, and she would talk to me about it. And in the end, in her later stages of dementia, she became very combative, so a lot of personality changes. But both were diagnosed with dementia, specifically Alzheimer's disease. So this is what drove me to do what I do. Because how could two extraordinary women with two different types of symptoms have the same diagnosis? So the clinical classification of dementia, and you have to think of dementia as a broad category. I'm from Detroit, so I'm going to make some car jokes here. So you can have a car, right, but then you can have a brand of car. And in my mind, there's only 3 brands of cars. There's Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And for the record, I drive a Ford. So the definition of a dementia, just like you have the broad category of a car, is a decrease in activity of daily living and cognitive impairment. So a person that just became a paraplegic, they wouldn't have dementia because they would have decreases in their activity of daily living, but they wouldn't have decreases in their cognitive impairment. But say somebody with, say, Down syndrome, they will not have potentially decreases in their cognitive impairment, but they would have decreases in their activities of daily living. So definition of dementia. But the big thing is, again, is you have this big broad category of dementia as a diagnosis, but there has a lot of underlying causes for that dementia. So what's the car brand? Is it a Ford? Is it a GM? Is it a Chrysler? And there are a lot of underlying causes of this dementia. So Dr. Hanks mentioned about his father and what his father went through, and the underlying diagnosis being the frontal temporal dementia. So a lot of these words, I'm very sorry if you've had to hear these words in context of one of your loved ones, but they are quite devastating. And so why do we need to understand this, right? You can have these words, but we need to understand this because we need to understand that underlying disease, to get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. I got to be careful, I'm standing on the edge here. So this is a term called precision medicine. It's a big buzzword right now. And again, this is just a nice little thing of how we can do that. So we can look at, do they have causative mutations? But a lot of these mutations are in less than 1% of these population. Most of dementia is called sporadic, which means we kind of don't understand the underlying causes of that. And clinical diagnosis is not an exact science. They're based on symptoms. So just like if you go to the doctor and you have a bellyache and you have a high fever, do you have the cold or the flu? They're probably going to treat you the same. They're going to send you home with antibiotics. The same kind of is with dementia. And this is a paper we published a while back comparing outward clinical symptoms, so a symptom of Parkinson's disease, and the underlying pathology when we looked at their brain. And if a person had Parkinson's disease for less than 5 years, the clinician, and I'm using this term very loosely, was right 50% of the time. So imagine being diagnosed with a disease, and all you can have are these few outward symptoms, but come autopsy time, it's not what the doctor said it was. But please don't go back to your doctors. Again, it's like the cold and the flu thing. So how does one classify dementias pathologically? And the best example that you could have is there's car accidents in the brain. So there's these proteins that we all normally have in our brain, but somehow in these dementias they go awry and they kind of bump into each other or fold on each other to create aggregates. So dementia will have these abnormal aggregates, these car accidents, in specific areas of the brain. And as I'm a pathologist, I like to show pretty pictures, but these are devastating beauty, because even though these things look beautiful, they're wreaking havoc in the brain. So these are the amyloid plaques of Alzheimer's disease. And we use certain stains to bring out that amyloid plaque. So these are just two representations of different stains. One is the brown, and then one is the kind of greenish look here, but they both kind of have that same shape. So that's what an amyloid plaque looks like, and that's one of the abnormal aggregates in Alzheimer's disease. Another big one that people talk about is tau. So tau can be aggregated in many different diseases. So you can have the tangles. Oh, now I have to have the pointer here. I'm doing my workout. It's not like this. It's more like this. So you can have these tau tangles in Alzheimer's disease. You could have tufted astrocytes in progressive supranuclear palsy, which is a dementia and a Parkinsonism. You could have Pick bodies in Pick's disease, astrocytic plaques in cortical basal degeneration. And hopefully, just outside of the different coloration difference, hopefully you can appreciate that these look very, very different. Their shapes are very different, and where they aggregate in the brain are very different. And the last one I'll talk about, even though I showed you that long list, I only have 20 minutes, and you guys are probably getting hungry right about now. And I think there's some good basketball games coming on too, right? So with these abnormal aggregates, the last one is Lewy bodies and dementia with Lewy bodies. And again, think about how that looks different than those other ones. Not just the appearance, but also it's a different type of protein that are in these car accidents that are happening. So in dementias, and a lot of work that I have done and my colleagues have done, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, have looked at these similarities and differences to try to tease out this precision medicine of dementia. So again, here's some of the big categories, and you can see each one of those clinical presentations has the dementia, but then you can have some other things. So with dementia with Lewy bodies, imagine having that devastating disease of dementia, but on top of that you have Parkinsonism. Even with Pick's disease, you have dementia, but then you could also have these language problems. And then each one of those is defined pathologically by an aggregate. And many studies of this, and this is where I step on my soapbox a little bit so you guys can understand, again, some of the work that we do, is many studies have aided greatly in understanding this. But there are some caveats into this. First off, studies typically only focus on one type of diagnosis. And so they can kind of miss this importance of these co-diseases that can exist. So this concomitant disease and these locational aspects as well. Right now we're in Davis, okay? I live in Sacramento. There can be a big difference, especially now when I was trying to drive here on that causeway and there was an accident. So a location does matter in the brain where things happen, and we did hear some talks previously about different locations in the brain. And the other thing is most of the research that you hear about, and it's not just in neuroscience and most research, cohorts are mainly upper middle class white Caucasian people. And so you think of the demographic variables that those people have. They might have had good access to health care, a little bit of better diet. So you can miss a lot of importance of social culture and economics. And we use race and ethnicity as a proxy for that. So think about when you typically go to the doctor, you'll fill out that form. You're not technically filling out, oh, what was your income this year when you go to the doctor? So we have to use race and ethnicity sometimes as a proxy for those. So take that with a grain of salt when I'm going to show you some of these data that are coming up. So even though I talked about these concomitant diagnoses, how frequent are they? Are they really, really rare? Are they very prominent in these diseases? So multiple diseases can exist in one brain, and in Alzheimer's disease, 30% of Alzheimer's cases can have a concomitant clinical pathological diagnosis. So that's almost a third. So imagine, I mean, with my grandparents, right? They both had those very different symptoms, but how did we know what was technically the Alzheimer's? They both could have had Alzheimer's disease, but what if one had another concomitant diagnosis which drove those other symptoms? It's very important to understand, especially with respect to treatment. So the next is that disease state, right? You just don't wake up and have a disease. Oh, I go to bed on Monday night. I might have stayed up late and maybe watched late night shows, but then I wake up and all of a sudden I have dementia. It's a process. And as we know with these numerous studies that we've looked at, is that these pathological hallmarks, these car accidents, happen first. And then they start to develop these full clinical expression. And here I kind of have a sideways view of the brain, like if I were to cut my brain like this. And the colored areas is how that traffic is backing up. So if I have an accident on the causeway, how far is that traffic backing up into the different areas of the brain? And this is kind of just showing that as that traffic backs up and gets more and more involved in the brain, you're going to have more clinical symptoms. And what of cohort composition? Well, we are very blessed here, and I am very blessed as well, to be involved in the Alzheimer's Disease Center. And there are numerous Alzheimer's Disease Center across the country. Right now, I believe there's 32, and hopefully you can, this is a map of the United States. Yes, it is, right? I'm awake. And then there's Sacramento, so there are one. And when you just look at their cohort composition, about 80% of the people in the Alzheimer's Disease Centers are white. And then when you look at ethnicity, about 7.6% are Hispanic. We live in Sacramento, and if you didn't know, Sacramento is one of the most diverse places, diverse, potato, places, even my language is diverse a little bit, in the United States, which is great. Even looking at this audience, I'm seeing people represented from numerous backgrounds, so I'm very excited. Thank you for coming out. But when we look at our population, so I showed you what did I do? Oh, you guys should have told me. So with the US population, hopefully you can appreciate, and I've highlighted here, is that Hispanics are about 10% more than what we have in the research cohort. But does this really matter? Who cares? Well, when you look at the pathological diagnosis, and hopefully you can see that these pie charts are a little bit different, as you go into the minorities, there's a lot more cerebrovascular disease that's creeping in. So there's not a lot of what we call pure Alzheimer's disease, so just Alzheimer's disease. There's a lot more concomitant diagnoses. And why does this matter? Again, because you'll have precision medicine that you need to have these approaches. I'm like getting all tangled. I'm going to pause for a second. There we go. So how can we delve into understanding a little bit better? And this is the example that I give, because again, you guys are probably getting hungry right now. And I don't own any stock in these companies, by the way, just so you know. So here we are, we're at this lovely place. We had a great time here, and we're at 550 Alumni Lane. But say I want to use Google Maps and I want to understand where the restaurants are, right? So I can go to Google, and this is great. We do this all the time, like where can I find a good restaurant? Well, one of the things this is using is machine learning, right? So it's using programs to make informed judgments and decisions to recognize patterns in data. Another example of this is, and this is a lovely app. Again, I do not own stock in Google. At least I don't think I do. I have a 401k through UC Davis. I don't know what it's invested in. So this is an arts and culture app where I can take a picture of myself. And apparently I look like this, this is why I wore a dress, so you can maybe, I mean, do I look? I think I do. Maybe that's a little bit, maybe I'm like 10 pounds lighter. I don't know. So my question is, can we use some of these technologies? And you saw those photos of the plaques and the tangles and the Lewy bodies. Can we use those technologies to understand that location? So just like I can understand that location of where all the restaurants are, because that would make my job a lot easier. And this is my typical job. So who visited the microscope booth? Anyone visit the microscope booth? And I want to thank the microscope booth because they gave me a prop. So this is, and also, did anyone visit the brain booth with all the brains? So you saw how big the brain was, right? But then how small the microscope slide is. So what we do is we cut the brain and we take little bits of pieces, and then I look at all those pieces and try to put them back together again, kind of like the Humpty Dumpty story. So I can take a slide with brain on it. I look at it underneath a microscope. Pathologists have been doing this for hundreds of years. And I go, oh, look, there's plaques in the brain. And here's the audience participation. It's not as cardio as other presentations. But what does that photo look like? Does it look like the top one, the middle one, or the bottom one? The middle one. Yay, you guys can all be pathologists in my lab. So what I want to do, because I have to look at so many slides, right, to kind of reconstruct that brain, is can I have a computer do it? So can I take a selfie, haha, selfie because there's cells in here, sorry, bad joke, of this, so digitize it, break it apart and put it back together again, to have it tell me where those plaques are in that slide. Because I want to know where those car accidents happen and how far that traffic is backing up. So again, just like these lovely Google Maps, right, I want to do that for the brain. So I covered a lot of things, and I am the last presentation of the day and probably the one that's keeping you from a lot of amazing other things and conversations. So I covered today, hopefully, the types of symptoms. So again, having that dementia, which is the decrease in activity of daily living and cognitive impairment. I talked about the underlying pathology, so all those different types of car accidents that are located in the brain. The disease stage, because we don't wake up with the disease, it's a process. The concomitant pathologies, so having more than one car accident in the brain, more than one type of disease. The demographic variables, so race and ethnicity, and how that can affect the dementia presentation. And then the use of the machine learning to understand the many phases of dementia. And then back to my grandparents of why are we doing this? Because if we understand these different phases of dementia, then we can have better biomarkers, treatments, and model systems. So with the model systems, you saw great work here with the mice and the rats that everyone's doing, but are those rats really representative of all the different types of things that are happening? And then even though you see my beautiful face, I am the front person to all these wonderful people that I work with at the Alzheimer's Disease Center. And not just here at UC Davis, we collaborate across California to get all this wonderful stuff done. And with that, I can take any questions. No hard ones.
I'm wondering if you can comment about studies that look for those proteins that you see in the plaques. Do you find them elsewhere in the body, just given that brain biopsies are a little hard on a person? So do you find precursors of them in the blood, or do you find some of them floating around somewhere else?
That is a great question, and please sit on my study section for grant review. So we've actually found those same proteins in the brain, in the periphery, specifically in the liver. So the liver is one of the main places that catabolizes amyloid beta, which means breaks it down. And we're even working in our laboratory on blood-based biomarkers. But a lot of times is how sensitive are these assays, and we really have to work those up. But it's a great question. We're actually doing work on that right now. Oh, I might have body odor. Oh, he's going to have your microphone. You get a microphone too.
You know, our population is growing. Is the amount of cases of dementia growing in proportion to the growth in population, or is it growing at a faster rate?
That's a very great question. So it's very hard to study that because right now we can study, notice how I use the term cohorts. It's very hard sometimes to do huge population studies because that takes a lot of money and everything. The biggest thing to factor in with your questions too is awareness. So just think of all you guys in this room being here, right? So you're being more aware of dementia. So think about back in the day. So say, I'm going to bring up World War I, right? People were coming back with shell shock and all that. And so it's that standpoint of it's an awareness. So what was actually dementia and what was not? So it's a very, very good question, and we're trying to pinpoint that, but that takes a lot of people and a lot of resources to do those types of works. But great question.
Hi, I've got a problem with your demographic chart. Maybe you could address this. We know that you show the Latino population much lower, the non-Hispanic white population much higher. But we know that the non-Hispanic white population in this state and in the country is much older than the Asian and Latino population. And I'm wondering whether you really are not reflecting not a difference in ethnicity so much as a difference in age, and whether you've taken account of the fact that these different ethnic groups are as a whole much different in their ages.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first diagram that I showed, that is strictly based on Alzheimer's disease centers, which are over the age of 65. So you are correct on that point. The second one is that consensus stuff. Oh, I didn't go, sorry, I like this photo so much. Go back a little bit. So this was the first one, right? So this is all based on Alzheimer's centers, which are typically 65 years and older. And this second one, I believe I did truncate that off to be 65 and above, but I can double check, and if you give me your email, I can make sure to check my data. I'm not gonna hashtag face tweet it or whatever. Fake tweet it, something like that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I did that, but I should definitely check my methods. Thank you for catching that. Anything else? I don't have a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Sorry if that's what you needed.
Great. Let's thank Dr. Dugger.